It has been more than 3 decades, but those bullet holes in the ceiling, this broken altar, still stand as vivid reminders of the history that unfolded here. And you all know the story, how 35 years ago this month, a group of students planned a peaceful protest to express their outrage over a new law requiring them to take courses in Afrikaans. Thousands of them took to the streets, intending to march to Orlando Stadium. But when security forces opened fire, some fled here to this church. The police followed, first with tear gas and then with bullets. And while no one was killed within the sanctuary, hundreds lost their lives that day, including a boy named Hector Peterson, who was just 12 years old, and Hastings in Shlovu, who was just 15. Many of the students hadn't even known about the protest when they arrived at school that morning, but they agreed to take part knowing full well the dangers involved, because they were determined to get an education worthy of their potential. And as the Archbishop noted, that June day wasn't the first or the last time that this church stood in the cross currents of history. It was referred to as the Parliament of Soweto. When the congregation sang their hymns, activists would make plans, singing the locations and times of secret meetings. Church services and even funerals often became anti-apartheid rallies. And as President Mandela once put it, Regina Mundi became a worldwide symbol of the determination of our people to free themselves. It is a story that has unfolded across this country and across this continent, and also in my country. The story of young people 20 years ago, 50 years ago, who marched until their feet were raw, who endured beatings and bullets and decades behind bars, who risked and sacrificed everything they had for the freedom they deserved. And it is because of them that we are able to gather here today. It is because of them that so many of these young women leaders can now pursue their dreams. It is because of them that I stand before you as First Lady of the United States of America. That is the legacy of the independence generation, the freedom generation, and all of you, the young people of this continent. You are the heirs of that blood, sweat, sacrifice, and love. So the question today is, what will you make of that inheritance? What legacy will you leave for your children and your grandchildren? What generation will you be? Now, I could ask these questions of young people in any country on any continent, but there is a reason why I wanted to come here to South Africa to speak with all of you. As my husband has said, Africa is a fundamental part of our interconnected world. And when it comes to the defining challenges of our times, creating jobs in our global economy, promoting democracy and development, confronting climate change, extremism, poverty, and disease, for all this, the world is looking to Africa as a vital partner. That is why my husband's administration is not simply focused on extending a helping hand to Africa, but focusing on partnering with Africans who will shape their future by combating corruption and building strong democratic institutions, by growing new crops, caring for the sick. And more than ever before, we will be looking to all of you, our young people, to lead the way. And I'm not just saying that to make you all feel good. The fact is that in Africa, people under 25 make up 60% of the population. And here in South Africa, nearly 2/3 of citizens are under the age of 30. So over the next 20 years, the next 50 years, our future will be shaped by your leadership. And I want to pause for a moment on that word, leadership. Because I know that so often when we think about what that word means, what it means to be a leader, we think of presidents and prime ministers. We think of people who pass laws or command armies, run big businesses, people with fancy titles, big salaries. And most young people don't fit that image. And I know that often when you try to make your voices heard, sometimes people don't always listen. I know there are those who discount your opinions, who tell you you're not ready, who say that you should sit back, wait your turn. But I am here today because when it comes to the challenges we face, we simply don't have time to sit back and wait. I'm here because I believe that each of you is ready, right here and right now, to start meeting these challenges. And I am here because I know that true leadership that lifts families, leadership that sustains communities and transforms nations, that kind of leadership rarely starts in palaces or parliaments. That kind of leadership is not limited only to those of a certain age or status. And that kind of leadership is not just about dramatic events that change the course of history in an instant. Instead, true leadership often happens with the smallest acts, in the most unexpected places, by the most unlikely individuals. Now, think about what happened here in Soweto 35 years ago. And many of the students who led the uprising were younger than all of you. They carried signs made of cardboard boxes and canvas sacks. Yet together, they propelled this cause into the consciousness of the world. And we now celebrate National Youth Day and National Youth Month every year in their honor. I mean, think about the giants of the struggle. People like Albertina Sisulu, whose recent passing we all mourn. Orphaned as a teenager, she worked as a nurse to support her siblings. And when her husband, Walter Sisulu, became Secretary General of the ANC, it was up to her to provide for their family. When he was in prison for 26 years, it was up to her to continue his work. And that she did. With a mother's fierce love for this country, she threw herself into the struggle. She led boycotts and sit-ins and marches, including the 1956 Women's March, when thousands of women from across this country converged on Pretoria to protest the past laws. They were women of every color, many of them not much older than all of you. Some of them carried their babies on their backs. And for 30 minutes, they stood in complete silence, raising their voices only to sing freedom songs like Nkosi Sikelel' Afrika. Their motto was simple but clear. If you strike a woman, you strike a rock. Ma Sisulu, the students of Soweto, those women in Pretoria, they had little money, even less status, no fancy titles to speak of, but what they had was their vision for a free South Africa. What they had was an unshakable belief that they were worthy of that freedom. And they had the courage to act on that belief. Each of them chose to be a rock for justice. And with countless acts of daring and defiance, together they transformed this nation. Together they paved the way for free and fair elections, for a process of healing and reconciliation, and for the rise of South Africa as a political and economic leader on the world stage. Now, I know that as your generation looks back on that struggle and on the many liberation movements of the past century, you may think that all of the great moral struggles have already been won. As you hear the stories of lions like Madiba and Sisulu and Luthuli, you may think that you can never measure up to such greatness. But while today's challenges might not always inspire the lofty rhetoric or the high drama of struggles past, the injustices at hand are no less glaring, the human suffering no less acute. So make no mistake about it, there are still so many causes worth sacrificing for. There is still so much history yet to be made. You can be the generation that makes the discoveries and builds the industries that will transform our economies. You can be the generation that brings opportunity and prosperity to forgotten corners of the world and banishes hunger from this continent forever. You can be the generation that ends HIV/AIDS in our time, the generation that fights not just the disease, but the stigma of the disease. The generation that teaches the world that HIV is fully preventable and treatable and should never be a source of shame. You can be the generation that holds your leaders accountable for open, honest government at every level. Government that stamps out corruption and protects the rights of every citizen to speak freely, to worship openly, to love whomever they choose. You can be the generation to ensure that women are no longer second-class citizens, that girls take their rightful places in our schools. You can be the generation that stands up and says that violence against women in any form, in any place, including the home, especially the home, that isn't just a women's rights violation, it's a human rights violation, and it has no place in any society. You see, that is the history that your generation can make. Now, I have to be honest. Your efforts might not always draw the world's attention, except for today. You may not find yourself leading passionate protests that fill stadiums and shut down city streets. And the change you seek may come slowly, little by little, measured not by sweeping changes in the law, but by daily improvements in people's lives. But I can tell you from my own experience and from my husband's experience that this work is no less meaningful, no less inspiring, and no less urgent than what you read about in the history books. See, it wasn't that long ago that my husband and I were young, believe it or not, just starting out our careers. After he graduated from university, Barack got a job as a community organizer in the struggling neighborhoods on the south side of Chicago. A lot of people there were out of work, barely getting by. Children had few opportunities and little hope for their future. And trust me, no one thought that this